Thanks, bro. We are in a series right now called Practice the Way of Jesus, and been on that for a bit. We're supposed to do this particular part of, my hat. We're supposed to do this particular part of this last week, and then all the things went sideways, and so we weren't able to do it. But grateful to be back this week. The reason we're doing this Practice the Way of Jesus series is because Jesus gives these words where he says, like, hey, there's these two different people in the world, and he basically breaks the world into two different groups. And he's like, there's one group that built their house, and they built it on the sand, and there's another group that built the house and did a little bit extra and dug it a little bit deeper and built it on the solid rock. And he goes, those two different types of people, both of them experienced storms, and one that was built on the sand perished, and the house was torn down, but the one that was built on the solid foundation, it withstood the storm. And he says it's the same way with those who practice my word. There's some out there that building their lives on sand and that they're not putting my word into practice. They might even know my word. They know it. They've been in church their entire lives. They may be able to quote it or anything, but they're not practicing it. And they're building their lives on sand, and they're basically doing it themselves, versus those that put in the extra of like, hey, I actually believe this by faith. I want to practice this. And so we want to be people who practice it. There are actual benefits of practicing the way of Jesus. Salvation is free. He purchased that for you. But there are glories to be experienced to those who actually put his word into practice. And so we want to do that. This particular section of it has been becoming like Jesus and doing things and practicing things that help us to become like him. And so we're talking about fearless living today, or fearlessness. It might sound strange, but Jesus is like one of the most, if you look at his life in the Gospels, like he's one of the most courageous, fearless people in the world. Like, whether you believe that or not, like non-Christians believe that, who study him and are kind of amazed by his life. And they're like, man, he kind of speaks truth to power and doesn't really, he like walks into the temple. He's like, hey guys, Jesus, and he just throws some stuff over. And like he hears that all these people want to kill him and stuff. And to those people, he's like, oh, you want to kill me? And he calls them like a hypocrite. He calls them children of hell. He calls them children of the devil. Like he's not pulling punches against it. Like he knows that like, hey, you're going to try and kill me. You want to do that. And instead of being like, I should be really nice to those people, he's like, no, I'm going to speak truth to those people. But he also does this with his friends. He's not worried or fearful about his reputation, so he hangs out with all of the sinners and all of the prostitutes and all of the outcasts, everybody that's like, don't hang out with them because it'll ruin your reputation. He's like, I'm not fearful about my reputation. And so it led him just to live this free life where he's like, I'm just trusting in the life of my Father that he has for me. And so we want to become like him in that way, mainly because it sets us free as well. But we're going to talk a little bit about fear today. But we're going to look at this passage, Proverbs 29:25, and this is what Solomon, or the proverb writer, likely Solomon, writes. It says, fear of man will prove to be a snare, but whoever trusts in the Lord is kept safe. This is the word of the Lord. Do we have a couple more of those phobias up there? I just want to pull some. They're in the slides announcements. I just want to see. I think we had like 5 more. I just want to see. Anybody know what octophobia is? Fear of number 8. What about globophobia? Don't give it to him right away. Globophobia? Fear of balloons? Boom. You had it? You have fear of balloons? No way. What about this next one here? Fear of long words. That's my whole life. And this last one here. I don't know what this one is. Oh, fear of beards. Fear of being too awesome is something else. I have that. Oh, fears are so weird, man. We give them names. There's actually this passage, fear of man, there's a phobia that like the Bible is referencing a phobia. And so they actually gave it a name. They're like, hey, this exists, and you could have just read the Bible. But I want to talk about this idea today. If you looked at, and I asked a couple of you, if you look at all of the commands in the Bible, like just by sheer number, to determine what does God care about the most, the number one command that's said the most and asked of us the most is do not fear. And so if you're like, what does God care about based on the number of things that are said about a specific command, you'd have to, if you just base it on that,
you'd have to say, well, he must care that we don't live in fear. He says it the most of all the other commandments, and so this must be the thing that he cares about the most. I'm not suggesting that is what he cares about the most. I'm just saying if you just base it on number of times a command is said, everybody would wind up in the same place going like, he really does care that we don't live in fear. And so I want to talk about that today because it is the most used command in the entire thing. And so the reason I think that he talks about this is because he, as Solomon says, like it leads to a trap. It says fear of man is a snare. It leads to a trap. And then he says, but to trust in the Lord leads you ultimately to safety. And what's interesting about that is like if you have a fear, normally to avoid that fear, you are trying to enter into safety. I'm acting on my fear in order to get myself safety. And so what happens is like Solomon's going, it doesn't work that way. It's actually backwards. You have a fear that leads you to be trapped. You're pursuing safety and finding a trap. Versus those who trust in the Lord, they aren't trapped. They actually experience the safety you're looking for. And so I want to talk about two traps that fear plays in your life. And hopefully you see your life in this. It is not a shaming thing. It's just to show you like there's a reason God said this 365 times. Do not fear, do not fear, do not fear. There's a reason it's listed. Because these two traps are dangerous and deadly, and it steals the life that he actually has for you. It doesn't set you into safety. It actually steals from you. And so two traps that we see. The first is that fear leads us towards a destructive pattern. Fear leads towards a destructive pattern. I made this up in terms of the name, but fear often works by a framework called the circle of irony. We have this on the next slide here. And so basically the way it works is starting at the top, you have a fear, and then you feel a desire to avoid the fear, which leads you to come up with an action or inaction, like I'm going to do something to avoid the fear, or I'm not going to do something to avoid the fear. Then it leads you to the effort. You actually put the thing into practice, which ultimately leads you to experiencing your fear. This is how fears normally work. It's like I have one, I want to avoid it, so I do something, and I end up having it experienced in my own life. For instance, I have a very funny story about Great Britain who ruled India at a time. The problem was there was a lot of snakes, like cobras in the land, and they were terrified. The British people didn't know what to do with snakes. And so, this is a quote, this is what it says. It says, during their rule of colonial India, the British were deathly afraid of the large number of venomous king cobras in New Delhi, which makes sense. So, what they did, they have a fear. They offered a generous bounty for every dead cobra collected. The bounty system was a fantastic success, with huge numbers of dead cobras soon turned in for their reward. As the available pool of snakes dwindled and the bounties became more difficult to collect, some entrepreneurial Indians realized that to breed these snakes in captivity and thus continue to receive the bounty. Soon a large cottage industry of snake farming sprung up. When the British became aware of this scheme, they immediately scrapped the bounty program and I'm getting out of India. And naturally, the cobra farmers now had no use for these thousands of poisonous snakes they were raising, so they released them back into the wild. The number of king cobras in New Delhi was twice as large as it was before this good idea was hatched. Do you see how this works? It's like this circle of irony, but that's ironic. We did everything we could to avoid it and somehow wound up going, our worst fear is being realized, and I did everything I could to possibly avoid it. But it's not like a fake thing. This is a real thing. Like your fear leads you to this, and it takes you here, and then you're like, I'm going to do something to avoid the fear. And how did I wind up here? How does this happen? But it happens in the Bible all the time. Adam and Eve. I don't think we have this on the screen. Adam and Eve, for example, in the garden. They have a fear that they're missing out, which leads them to reach for more and eat the fruit, which leads them to missing out on everything. I mean, everything is gone from you now. Like you thought, like you're not like God. It's like, oh no, I'm going to be like God, and you bite it. And it's like now you're nothing. Now it's broken. Now you're out. All of your inheritance, everything is gone. Fear of an uprising, go to Exodus. Fear of an uprising and rebellion and destruction led Aaron, Moses' brother, to try and keep the peace by creating the golden calf idol, which then led the people to rebelling against God, a civil war between the people, and a lot of people dying, and then a plague that destroyed many Israelites. He was like, I want to keep the peace. I want everything to be fine. I don't want a just huge uprising to walk out. So here's what I'm just going to do this thing to make the people feel better, and it led to exactly what he was trying to avoid in the first place. King Saul was afraid of David becoming more powerful than him, so in fear, he made David a soldier, hoping that he might get killed in battle. Instead, what he feared became true, because the more battles David went into, the more victories he had, which made the people love him more, which made Saul more fearful, and then everything that he was trying to do was ultimately accomplished. We're like, David has slain his tens of thousands and Saul his ones of thousands. Peter, afraid that the worst thing would happen, basically Jesus dying, acted then in fear. And then ultimately the worst thing did happen. It wasn't Jesus dying that ultimately was the worst thing, but him denying his best friend 3 times. And so this happens in our lives too. When I was dating Rainey, first, like at the very beginning, I was so nervous about our relationship, and I was like, I am going to make this work. It's going to work. I'm a 3 on the Enneagram. I can make anything work. I'm going to make this work. And so I just decided, I was like, I'm going to wake up at 5 a.m., I'm going to text her, I'm going to call her, I'm going to do this, and from 5 a.m. to 12 midnight, I'm going to do it just constantly. And so what I did, I was like, I'm going to constantly be in her life because I don't want her to forget about me. She was away. She was in Chicago. I was in Memphis. And I was like, I'm going to constantly be in her life. I'm going to constantly surprise her with surprise trips, which aren't as much fun as you might think they are. I'm going to constantly try and be in her life. And what I did, without knowing it, in my fear, it led me to smother her. And I don't know if you've ever tried to smother someone, but they don't like it. They can't breathe. It's not good. And so that's ultimately what she says. It's like, I can't breathe here, and I'm dying. And then she broke up with me. And I was like, how? I did everything. I did everything I could possibly do to make this relationship work. But my fear led me to make some decisions that ultimately led me to do this thing that ultimately led to the fear being realized in my life. You see this in your own life. People have a fear. You've seen this with other people. People have a fear that you won't fit in. And so you do things to try and fit in. It's inauthentic, and people reject you for trying too hard. Or, worse, they do accept you, this new version of you, but you still don't fit in because you're not acting like you. You're actually acting like somebody else. And so you're into this group, but you're not fitting that way because you're not actually being yourself. We have a fear. You've seen this before. Fear that, I see this a lot, especially with the older girls, fear that no one else will ever love you. So you stay with a person even though they don't treat you very lovingly. You're afraid of not finding another person. And you're like, what if I don't find anybody else? I'm afraid of being alone. I'm afraid of being in a space where no one loves me. And then you have a relationship, ultimately, that you're staying in that you're not feeling loved in anyways. So you actually have the thing. It just came back around full circle. I'm afraid of not being loved, and so I'll just stay in this unloving relationship, which leads you to having a relationship where you're not loved. It's the exact same thing that happens. Some of you are afraid that if you follow Jesus, you won't experience all that life has to offer. If I follow Jesus, I won't experience all that life has to offer you. And so you do things to help you experience what life has to offer, only to realize that what life has to offer is more bondage and more pain and more conflict. And so the thing that you were trying to avoid, you were actually fearful of following Jesus because you wanted to experience fullness of life. In your pursuits of that, you end up experiencing less of life, more bondage, more shackles, more pain, and all the conflict. Our fears just happen to work on this cycle, this circle of irony, where it's like when we act on our fears, it leads us to the thing that we were trying to avoid in the first place. And so this is why God is saying, like, hey, 365 times, don't fear. It's not don't have fears. Fears, you will have them. The idea is not just don't have them, just don't act on those things. Rather, instead, trust that I'm telling you, you don't need to be afraid and act on that fear. I know that you'll have them, but don't act on them. Fears normally come true because we act on our fears, which is a crazy thing to think about, but fears normally come true in our lives because we act on those fears. So just for an equation, you math people in the room, if we just look at this equation here, decisions equal outcome. If you make a decision, you get an outcome. I made a decision, I got an outcome. All you're doing in the next thing is adding fear to the decision. Decision plus fear is a fear outcome. It's actually pretty easy when you see it mathematically. You have a decision you have to make, it leads to an outcome. When you act on your fear, you're just bringing that in, and you're making it a part of that. And so ultimately it leads that way. And so again, God commands us 365 times, you don't have to live this way. This is not a space that I want you to live. It's not the life that I have. A fearful way of living is not the way I want you to live. It steals from you, bless you. It does stuff in your life that steals life from you, and I want that to happen to you. So, circle of irony with fear. I'd love for you to talk about that in your small groups when you go there and see how you experience that. Second trap is that fearful living is anti-living. Fearful living is anti-living. What I mean is we think that I fear that this will happen, and so I'm going to make sure that doesn't happen, and then we live our lives doing that. I fear that something will happen. I'll live my life making sure that doesn't happen. But that's not living. That's called anti-living. What I mean, like you're not pursuing something. You're living your life avoiding something. I have a fear. I'm going to make sure this doesn't happen. I'll live my life making sure this doesn't happen. You're living your life trying to avoid something versus I'm going to live my life to pursue something. There's a difference between trying not to die all the time and just living your life. Do you understand that those are completely different things? Just trying to live your life not to die is not living. That's constantly in fear and avoiding death and all of it, but just living your life. And fear gets you locked into this thing that's so similar, but it's ultimately anti-living. So imagine, just if it helps, imagine if you were constantly focused on not tripping when you walk. You're like, my whole life, I just don't want to trip ever. And that was like, I don't know if you had a phobia of tripping. I don't know what that would be. We could find out. But let's just imagine like that was your thing. My whole life, I just don't want to trip. Where would your eyes be constantly? Like it'd be like right here. Like, I'm never going to trip. I'm going to crush it. Like, step. I got to step. Nailed it. Like, you would constantly be looking down. If that was the whole thing, I'm just trying not to trip. But you would miss everything. Like, you never played 9-square. You'd be the worst 9-square player in the world. You're like this. You get smacked in the head. Like, you'd never be able to do anything. Like, in school or wherever. Like, you see the sunset? Nope. Focused right now. Can't look up. You ever get a girlfriend? Unless she's down here. I don't have one. If you were, it's ridiculous, but like, if you were constantly trying not to do something, you miss everything else that's around you. And so in the same way, fear leads us to do that. You're seeking to avoid something, and you live your life to avoid a thing versus actually pursuing something, and it steals the actual vision of what life could be. And what you end up living for is what you don't want life to be. It's an anti-vision, it's anti-living. For example, the difference, we have this up on the screen, the difference in pursuing a meaningful life or I have a fear that my life doesn't matter. These things are very similar when you talk. I'm fear that I don't matter, or I want to pursue a meaningful life. Pursuing a meaningful life might lead you to serve others. It might lead you to, where we at? Here we go. Might lead you to serve, it doesn't even fit on the screen. That's bad. Might lead you to serve others. Might lead you to be generous. Might lead you to help other people, to create something, to leave your mark on the world. I want to have a meaningful life. It'll lead you to do that. But fear that your life doesn't matter can lead people to depression. It can lead them to suicide. It can lead them to doing things just to be seen. It can lead, I have a fear that my life doesn't matter. It can lead people to do bad things just so that people talk about them, just so that they matter a little bit. But do you see the difference? They're so close. But one is pursuing a meaningful life, and so it leads them to do certain things that are meaningful. And the other one is it seems so similar. I just have a fear that my life doesn't matter. I feel like my life doesn't have meaning. And all of a sudden, you begin living an anti-version of that thing. And it leads to you pursuing things in a very different way. Next one, pursuing health. Pursuing health versus a fear of I don't look, where are we at? Sorry, pursuing health or fear of not looking like what you think you should look like. Pursuing health is a positive and healthy thing. Leads to good choices about food, working out, and all the rest of it. You're pursuing health. Health is a thing, a standard and absolute. This is what it looks like. Fear of not looking how you think the way you should look, it can make people do drastic things, unhealthy measures, hating their body, unhealthy eating habits, ultimately leading to eating disorders. This is where this difference between, like, my girlfriend in high school, this is where she went from, like, I want to be healthy to, like, I don't look the way that I want to look. And I was like, man, those sound very similar, but they're not. Because one led you to, I need to practice health even in my working out. I need to practice health even in eating enough food. I need to practice health in some of the things that I'm doing with my sleep versus I have a fear I don't look like the way I'm supposed to look like. And then all of a sudden it led down this really, really dark path for her where she had to go into therapy into Arizona and all the rest of it to really save her life. But again, it's so simple. Like, I'm just being healthy. It's like, no, you're avoiding not looking like the way that you fear that you might look like. Very, very different outcomes. People who are constantly fearful of what people think about you will keep you from doing things that you want to do, keep you from living the life that you would actually live. Ultimately, if you feel this way, I'm constantly fearful of what other people think about me, you live the life you think they want you to live. You do things they want you to do, and you don't live the life the way you want to. You live a life the way you think they want to. Ultimately, if you fear what other people think about you, and it grips you, and this is what, like, I'm worried what they're going to think, you end up making decisions that you think they want you to make. And so you're living life through them. They're actually the ones that are vicariously living through you. It's not a decision that you would make on your own. You can't make those types of decisions. I can't think for myself. I have to think, what is he thinking? What is she thinking? And then I have to make sure I live that way. It's not, even for somebody to ask me, what do you want? Like, I don't know what I want. I want whatever makes them think well of me. And so you don't even remember what it was like to make your own decision because you're so wrapped up in what other people think about you. What do you want to wear? I have no idea. I want to wear whatever the group thinks is the thing I'm supposed to wear. What do you want to do? I want to do whatever keeps me in their good graces and makes me feel like I'm important to them. Do you have any idea what you actually want to do, though? No, I have no idea what I actually want to do. And some people even know, they know, no, I know what I actually want to do, and I'm just so locked in, and I'm so chained to this, and I'm so shackled to this, and imprisoned to this that I can't make a decision anyways. There's a difference between pursuing life and avoiding your fears. And fear just gets in there, and it does weird stuff, and it steals life from you, and it takes from you. It puts you on this thing like, I'm going to avoid this, and I'll make decisions to avoid it, and somehow you wind up right back at it. It's like, how? I gave all of my effort to avoid this thing. How did I wind up with my greatest fear being realized when I was trying to avoid it? It's like, oh, because you made a decision looking for an outcome, but you added fear into it. It just happens to work this way. And the same with like, how did my life wind up here? Why do I feel the way that I feel? It's like, oh, because fear has gotten in there, and it's driving everything that you're doing. And you're not living anymore. You're anti-living, which doesn't feel very good. So, because of that, God is adamant. Please, do not fear. The fear of man, the fear in general, is a snare. It is a trap. You think it leads you to a great place, and it ultimately just traps you down, steals from you, and it takes from you. So God is adamant. Don't live your life in fear. Don't let fear control you. The best picture, again, I said this at the beginning, the best picture of this is Jesus. Fearlessness of Jesus. I mean, think of going to the cross and dying. It's not just the idea of like, boy, he took on the cross, and that must have taken a lot of courage to do that. But like, think of what the conversation must have been like if somebody, like Satan were to say like, hey man, what if this doesn't work? Or in truth, what if half the world hears about your sacrifice on the cross, your death on the cross, and doesn't give one crap about it? Is it worth the pain? Is it worth the nails in the hands and the feet? Like, just do some risk, evaluation. Is it worth it if half the people in the world just don't care? Like, are you still going to go and do it? Or is that still what you're going to go and do? And he's like, yes, this is what the Father has for me to do. I don't live in fear of what other people might make a decision based on my sacrifice. I'm not sitting there doing the risk-reward thing about this thing. This is what my Father has for me, and I'm trusting him. I'm not living in fear of whether the risk is worth it. I'm living in trust knowing that this is what the Father has for me. This is why Jesus is able to forgive you unconditionally. You guys have actually had this happen to you if someone's ever hurt you. You're like, I want to forgive them, but what if they do it again? What if I forgive them and then they hurt me again? What the implication is, I'm afraid, I have fear that if I forgive them, they'll be off the hook and then they'll do it again. And then I'll just run through this pattern over and over and over. I have fear that my forgiveness will somehow free them up to hurt me again. And Jesus just doesn't have that fear. He's like, I actually really know that the prodigal son who came home, I understand in the story that he might just run off again. But I'm still going to slaughter the fatted calf. We're still going to throw a party and say that the son who was dead is now alive. I'm still going to do it. I'm not afraid that my forgiveness might be taken advantage of. I love these people. This is what I'm called to do. And so some of you are like, man, I don't know if he can. He doesn't have the fear that you'll do it. He actually knows what you're going to do. And he doesn't live in the fear of like, I'm going to forgive them, but what if they do it? He's not worried about that. His fearlessness ultimately leads to our freedom because he's completely free in it. He's not trapped by what other people think. Again, read the Gospels. He does some stuff. I'm like, chill, man, chill. They're about to kill you. Like there's one time where he's doing something. He says, I can't remember exactly what it was, but he says something. Somebody would know this. He says like something about like, equates him to the Father and that kind of thing. And it says that all the people grabbed stones to throw at him. And so just imagine standing in a group like this. You guys are all standing up. I'm talking or something like that. And then all in the midst of it, all of you grab a rock and you start like rearing back. I'd be like, oh boy, like what grabbing like the biggest person. Peter, get it right here. What it says is like he walks directly through the crowd. Instead of running away from it, it doesn't say that he walked away from the crowd. He walked into it all the way through it. And I'm like, you're a crazy dude, man. Like, you're a crazy fella. Like, that's nuts. But, like, it was just something about it. And so I love this about Jesus. But he was the fearless one. He was one who actually, again, experiencing fears. And he talks about those fears in Gethsemane. But not acting on those fears. And it's a very, very important thing. Fear is an emotion. It's something that you fear. Of course you do. But the idea and the trust part is like, but you don't have to act on that. You don't have to act on that fear. So two things about how to grow in fearlessness, and then I want to give you a practice. How do we grow in fearlessness? One is to ask for it. So just to ask for it. Just ask Jesus for it. Be honest that you're afraid of people. Be honest that you're afraid of other things. Just be honest about this thing. I did this all month, last month. It was like, in my journal, I asked myself a different question, and my question was, what are you afraid of? Which is really challenging because it was super humbling. I was like, oh, man, I'm afraid of this, and I didn't even realize it. Making myself write it down. But we have a hard time saying that we're afraid because we're supposed to be like, I'm not afraid. I'm very capable. And it's like, but inside, I don't know that I'm as capable as I say that I am. Like, ask for these things. Ask for feelings. Ask the Lord for it. Bring your fears to Him. Tell Him that you don't want to be afraid of that thing. He actually does want to work in your life. He actually does want to free you of your fears. Show Him an area where you want to grow, and He's like, thank you for inviting me into that. I'd love to help you. It's not a fake thing. There are some things He's just waiting for you to go like, look, I'm not going to force my love. I'm not going to force my power on you. There's this moment where Jesus goes to a blind man, and he's blind. He's called blind Bartimaeus. And he walks up to him, he's like, what do you want me to do for you? And blind Bartimaeus is like, I'm blind, Bartimaeus. I'd like to see. And he's like, oh, okay, cool. But I'm waiting for you to ask because I'm not going to force my love, my power. I'm not going to do that. What do you want? I don't want to be afraid of this anymore. Great. Let's work on that together. Just ask for it. So, I'm using very simple words, but there's tons of passages in the Bible. David says, I sought the Lord, and He answered me and delivered me from all of my fears. Not the problems, but the fears. Sought the Lord, He answered me, delivered me from all of my fears. And Terry talks about the verse in Philippians being one of her favorites. Like, do not be anxious about anything, but by everything, by prayer and petition, make your request known to God. Ask Him for it. Second thing is spend time with Jesus. Just spend time with Him. My son is becoming like me because he's spending time with me. That's good and bad. There are really good things about that. I'm really proud of him. And there's other things that I'm like, ooh, that came from me. And it's really not good. He also hangs out with this girl at school who we love everybody because we're Jesus followers, but she's on like the lower part of that list because every time he hangs out with her, he comes back to the house and like really fit, pitchy, and all the different, like, wants to, like, very bossy. And I'm like, oh, you've been hanging out with that girl. Like, I know who you've been around. We don't like her. You know, like, we don't act like that. Like, you're a Segars. I don't even know what her last name is. Like, we don't do that. But you can tell who people have been around. And so if Jesus is the fearless one, if Jesus is the one who has fears like us, shares in our fears, but doesn't respond in fear, we need to become like that. And the only way that we do that is by spending time with Him. There's this beautiful, beautiful verse in Acts 4 that talks about, you don't have to go to it yet, but thank you for being on the ball. This beautiful, beautiful verse in Acts 4 that talks about Peter and John, and they're on trial before the Pharisees, the Sanhedrin, and all these different people because they've been preaching in Jesus' name and healing in Jesus' name. And, these are the same two guys. Peter, 3 weeks ago, denied Jesus 3 times, to a 4-year-old because he was scared of her. You're like, okay. And then, John was the only one that was man enough to, or woman, I don't know, but he had, enough courage to at least follow closely to Jesus and be at the cross when He died and stuff. But these two dudes, they all abandoned Jesus in fear. They all abandoned Him when He was betrayed and the soldiers came for Him. And now they're standing in trial before these people, and they're threatening to kill them. And they start talking to these people, and now we can bring up the verse, Acts 4:13. It says that when the Pharisees and the religious leaders, when they saw the courage of Peter and John and realized that they were unschooled, ordinary men, they were astonished, and they took note that these men had been with Jesus. I love that. They recognized, you have been with Jesus because I see your courage. You are fearless in the midst of a trial. And then all of a sudden, their minds just went jogging to a couple of weeks ago when they stood watching Jesus, condemning Him, slapping Him, telling Him they're going to crucify Him, crowds shouting, crucify Him, crucify Him, and the man never buckled. He just stood there silently like a lamb taken to the slaughter. And it's like, this is my Father's world, and this is my Father's plan. I'm just going to move on with courage and fearlessness, doing this thing to bring salvation to the world. They just had a reckoning with them and being like, wait a second. We just experienced somebody like this. And it was like, oh, these men have been with Jesus. He's exactly like them. So these terrified men 3 weeks ago are now ultimately people who are now filled with the Spirit of God, which has crushed their fear of man, and now they're noticed. Why are they noticed? Because they have courage like Jesus, because they had spent time with him and they've been formed by him. You want your fears to be relieved. You spend time with the one who can actually bring an end to your fears. All right. How to practice it. I was trying to come up with like a really good way to help you guys remember it. So I was like, say your ABCs. Hooray. ABC. You ready? Here's how you practice fearlessness. Okay, it's simple. Admit your fear. We kind of already talked about bringing it to him, but admit your fear. What was I afraid of? You asked this question. What was I afraid of yesterday? That's the question I asked. Where did I experience fear yesterday? Just take some time and just consider this. It could take just 3 seconds, or maybe more than that. But what was I afraid of yesterday? And just admit that. And then B, bring it. Bring your fear to Jesus. Instead of you acting on that fear, bring that fear to Jesus. Again, these verses, David sought the Lord, and he answered me and delivered me from all my fears. And so, admit it, and then bring it to him in prayer. And then third, challenge yourself against your fear. Challenge yourself to do things that you're afraid of doing. Try new things to break fear's grip over you. And again, this looks different for everybody. But when you notice a fear, practice pressing into that thing. And so challenge yourself in those ways. There's this guy named Caleb Meakin. If you watched our Alpha video last week, you saw a video of him in the high school, middle school, and high school guys and girls, and the middle school girls. The middle school guys, y'all had a different video. Still basically the same thing, but Caleb wasn't in it. But Caleb Meakin became famous because he started doing these YouTube videos called the 40 Days of Rejection. He's a Christian, and so it was over Lent, which is the season that we're in right now. And what he was doing is he wrote to his followers on Twitter like, hey, just send me a challenge that I can do in public that's legit, that's not going to get me arrested. It can't be illegal, it can't hurt people and stuff like that. But send me a challenge, a hard one to do in public where I might get rejected. And so, again, he's a Christian. He did this over Lent. He was trying to break the fear of other people over his life, the fear of people's opinion, the fear of man. He was trying to break this exact same thing. And so they sent him all these things, and one of them was like to go on the street and just ask people straight up, like, hey, can I have $100? Hey, can I have $100? Hey, can I have $100? Like, just constantly. And he talks about it, and he was like, man, it was the hardest thing I've ever had to do because these people looked at you like you were crazy. They thought you were homeless, but then it was like, that's way too much money for a homeless person that normally asks. One of them was to stand on the street of London and just profess your love to every woman that passed by. Just every single, like, I love you so much. And so he constantly walked up to women. And again, it couldn't be, he's a Christian, so he had to be, Christian about it. But he was like, every woman he walked up to, excuse me, ma'am, do you believe in love at first sight? And she was like, no. And he was like, okay. And it was just constantly, and had some good conversations, but obviously nobody wanted to date him. One was to go to a fast food restaurant with a whole chicken and ask them to kill it and bake it. I think it was a live chicken. Nobody said yes to this. But it may have just been like a full-on chicken that's already been killed and just ready to go. But going to a fast food like McDonald's and being like, can you make me a sandwich? That was another one. Another one was he had to go and try and get into Wimbledon, which is this huge. He lived in London. And so go to the Wimbledon, the tennis thing, and try and get in. He actually did get in without a ticket. It was crazy the way that it worked out, but that's a funny video to watch. But I want to show you one. This is one called Guess Who, but this is Caleb Meakin trying to, again, break the fear of man in his life. So take a look at this.
The challenge for today is to convince students and people that they know me. It is to help me overcome my fear of chatting to people and being afraid that they might actually not recognize who I am. So I'm building this extreme situation where I go behind people and say, guess who? And see how they respond. Guess who? Hey, guess who? Hey, guess who? Guess.
Speak again.
I don't know. Guess who? Hey. No. You'll get it. Keep guessing. Come on.
Mate, I literally ain't got a clue.
Okay.
No?
You don't remember? You literally don't remember me?
Swear down.
The other week?
Where?
Like, you seriously
I
don't?
swear on my life.
Oh.
Swear down. Where?
Just look. No.
So awkward.
Oh.
Wait, the union.
Yeah. Guess who? Guess. Hey.
Hello?
How's it going? You alright?
Yeah, not bad, mate. You?
Yeah, good. How you been?
Not bad?
Yeah? It's been a while.
What happened?
Pardon? Oh, do you not recognise me?
No.
The other day.
Clearly not.
You serious?
That's what happened the other day.
We were chatting.
No, we weren't.
Yeah, we were. Sports science. Keep guessing.
Upstairs.
Just guess.
I don't know.
You don't know me. You do know me.
But I just don't know.
You sure?
Yeah.
It's me. Hey.
Oh, yeah.
Guess. Hey. How you doing?
I don't think we know each other.
We definitely do.
No.
Hey.
Oh.
How you doing? You well?
Good, man.
Yeah. How's things? You good?
We're watching your videos.
Oh, good. How you been?
The one in King's College.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
Sounds
good.
brilliant.
Nice. So that challenge there was incredibly terrifying to start off with. It was so nerve-wracking when people got nervous when I approached them, and then it made me nervous, and then they went red, and then I went red. But as you went on, you gained this confidence and didn't really care how people responded, and I think that's quite important to gain that thick skin. But that was fun. I'm excited. Keep giving me suggestions on the Facebook page. Like the new Facebook page. Follow us on Twitter.
So he did that for 40 days, and again, this whole thing, you can, all of this is on YouTube, you can do it. Just as a side note, Caleb Meakin, ultimately from doing that, like started this nonprofit to go back to his hometown in Ethiopia and do all this stuff to serve the poor and do all these things. He was like, what are you afraid of doing? What would you do if you knew you wouldn't fail? He was like, oh, I'd go and do this. And so he was like, after doing this challenge, it led him to act in faith and not in fear, and it led him to go do this thing. And then, unfortunately, it's a bummer, but 2 years ago, he actually passed away. So he was in a car wreck. But if you go on YouTube, the first video that pops up is his memorial service that they just had this February. My point, if you watch that, though, and listen to the testimonies of this dude's life, it wasn't just like a 40-day thing. Like, this guy was actually seeking to follow Jesus and practice that. And so talks a lot about being undignified in Jesus' presence and not being fearful to lift your hands and to worship the King of Kings in the way that you want to because of what other people will think. And he's constantly trying to break that in other people. And so he was trying to break that in himself. And he says that after he did that 40-day challenge, he was like, he went up to the girl he's been liking for a while and asked her out. He was like, I don't know what I've been afraid of, but it's been so awkward the last 40 days. Nothing's going to be that bad unless she just actually, hurts me or something like that. But it was a really, really cool story. But the point is, again, just to every now and then, man, sometimes you need to challenge yourself and just go, I'm afraid of expressing myself in worship for what other people think. Press into that challenge. Admit it, bring it to Jesus, and then press in. Challenge yourself on that thing. I'm afraid of correcting my friend or this person. I'm afraid if I tell them that I think they're wrong, they might leave me. And it's like, okay, admit that to God. Bring it to Him, and then challenge yourself to have that conversation. I'm afraid of breaking up with this person because what if I don't find anybody else? Admit it. Bring it to Him, and then challenge yourself in that direction. My encouragement to you is that fearlessness is actually the way that the Lord wants you to live, not experiencing fear, but not anchoring yourself into your fears and acting on them. And so my encouragement to you is to ultimately practice it. He has life for you, and it's experienced only through fearlessness. The life that He has for you is not given in fear. It's given in faith. And so the only way into the kingdom of God is through faith. And so the only way into the life He has for you is through faith. And so anytime you act in fear, you're actually going the exact opposite way of the life that He actually really has for you. And so if you're ever thinking like, no, this fear is legit, this one makes sense, this one's,
I'm just telling you, I understand being wise, but being fearful is something else. Wisdom leads you into healthy places and all the rest. Fear leads you into anti-living and ultimately into the circle of irony that's going to lead you to the life that you were trying to avoid all the time anyways. And so my encouragement to you is to talk to your small group about this, to pray about this thing, and then practice, again, your ABCs. Admit your fears, bring them to him, and then challenge yourself. Oh, I have a list. If you want to just see a list of things you can do, take a picture of this. This is from the Rejection Therapy card game, which you can buy on Amazon. And each day it comes with a new thing to weirdly try. So tomorrow, show a stranger a photo of your pet. Just walk up to him randomly, like, have you seen JoJo? Friday, ask a stranger for a high five. Not too hard. We do that all the time. Saturday, ask a stranger if you can pay for their meal or coffee, or if your parents can. That'll be awkward. Sunday, the next time you buy something, ask for a discount. Anything. Just next time you're at the store, can I get a discount? The point is that they'll say no to you, but they might say yes. And so why not ask? And we don't ask because it's like, what will they think of me asking? It'll be awkward. Press into the awkwardness. Challenge yourself. Monday, say hello to 3 people you don't know out in the public. Tuesday, ask a stranger for a change for $1. Nobody carries change. That's the point. Just ask them and be like, oh, you don't have it? And then if they do have it, if they have 4 quarters, ask for 10 dimes. Just be like, oh, no, actually, could I get 10 dimes? Just go a little harder at it, okay? And then the last one, at a restaurant, ask the waiter if you can buy the plate you just ate off of. You know? You ate your food, you're paying for your meal, now go like, can I have the plate? Anyways, again, just something funny to think about. But some of y'all, and all of us really, all of us are stuck somewhere in a fear. All of us are stuck somewhere in the midst of all of that. And Jesus wants us to break free of that. And I know that was funny. But some of these fears riddle us and pain us and leave us stuck, and they actually become real-time phobias that's like, hey, you need medication to even move forward with this thing. What's going on? And Jesus is like, I don't want fear to grab you like that and have a hold of you. I don't want it to anchor you down into a life that's not the one for you. And so my encouragement to you is to admit those fears, bring them to him, invite him into that stuff. He actually does want to free you, and he can do that. He will do that. And then challenge yourself. Have a little fun with it if you need to, but challenge yourself in those ways. Make a small non-money wager with a friend to ask for the plate, and you're like, you do the plate, I'll do the cup, and then ask to buy for it. But we're not going to do a response song. We're going to go to our small groups. Let me pray for us, and then we'll go. Father, thank you for your fearlessness to take on the cross. Thank you that you even share in our fears, that we do not have a God who doesn't resonate with what we feel. You understand our fears. You have felt fear. But God, you are the one who didn't act on your fears. And so I pray that we would become like you. I pray that we would lean on you to help us overcome our fears as well, and that you would do that in us as we bring those things to you. Thank you that you long to work within us. I pray that you would make us people who are fearless before you in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, go to small groups.